afternoon to you all, and you're very much welcome to today's show on Civic Space TV. It's been a while since I have been on the show, and I'm glad that I'm back, and I believe that you have all been keeping safe and well. As you're aware, the day before yesterday, the president addressed the nation. That was on Sunday evening, and he addressed the nation on the state of the economy. And so today's show is really going to be a conversation around the president's address. And it would be interesting for you to share insights on what your thoughts are on the address. But joining me in studio today are two amazing women to discuss the president's address on the state of the economy. And so to my left is Miss Eunice Musiime, who is the Executive Director of Akina Afrika. You're very much welcome, Eunice.
Thank you, Isabellla.
And then to my far left is Tricia Gloria Nabaye, who has been hosting the show and keeping fort. And Tricia is from the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, and she is also joining us on the show today. You're much welcome.
Thank you, Bella.
Thank you. So before we get into the president's address, I'd just like to just open this up by asking the two ladies on how the economy has been treating you. What are the two things that you have felt the pinch on, even before we get into the president's address?
Wow. Thank you, Isabellla. Good day to our viewers and listeners. It's a pleasure to be here this moment. So, Isabellla, that's a very good question. Obviously, fuel. For me, at first, I just used to think, okay, did those guys put in my fuel?
Yes.
Like, what's going on? You start blaming it on the pump attendants, just like how the president too was blaming some things on the opposition. So you immediately think that it's because the pump attendants have cheated you of your fuel, and that's why it's not going as far as it used to go.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the major one. The other, of course, is food in the home. You know, as you know, when you have children, chapati, wheat, flour,
Bread
is you know, a permanent one, and it just seemed to go faster than before. And so again, that's one of the things that is happening. So the food bill currently is quite high, and so we began to think about alternatives, began to think about how to be more efficient in the things that we prepare and in the things that we partake as a family.
Okay, thank you very much, Eunice. Tricia?
I think for me it was a slow realization of things are going south. And you begin to buy soap, then it's 10K, you're like, hey, what is going on? Then they tell you even cooking oil is now expensive. And so there was a slow but sure realization of things are going out of work. And so I think the past 2 weeks or so, everything else now, the bread is high. So you decide what you will eat. You begin to be a little bit frugal. You say, I'll eat this. You can do without this. So as much as half the time I'm in shock, like what's going on? But this is happening, and it's worldwide. It's happening to every one of us. So as the prices go up, yes, our shock will go on, but there's a little bit of recovery that comes with knowing you're not in it alone. And it's such a Ugandan thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think mine is fuel. You know how you fuel, and it's going to take you 2 days or 3, and then the next day you're back at the pump, and you're like,
I was here yesterday.
Yes, and so like Eunice, you're like, are they giving me air? And then the second one, I think the one that brought the reality was the border man. He told me was tezicha cola, because usually they run the errands for me. And then suddenly they were saying, no, Lukumi no longer works in our community. And even in the neighboring community, 2,000 is no longer it. So now we are paying double for some of those errands that are being run. But so those are the realities. And I believe that every Ugandan who is watching has felt the brunt of the economic crisis that we are facing today. And so before we even get into the president's speech, again, a random question, which we probably did not think of when we were starting, is to say, where did we lose it with this crisis?
Yeah. Well, it's also related to the president's speech. He started by explaining where we've been the last 2 years.
Yes.
And so it's very easy to narrow it down to the last 2 years. But we very well know that economies are built over time.
That's true.
So we can't start looking at the last 2 years without looking at the structure and the systemic issues that have been pertaining in our country. The current economic model. I was wondering when the president and the people that advise him get to that point where they ask themselves the question, does the current economic model work for us as Uganda, work for us as Africa? Because then that's where you begin to say, no, maybe it's actually not working. And as I listened to the president last evening, what came to mind was, if you have a 95-year-old patient who has cancer and you're trying to determine whether you should do surgery or not, most times you'll say, he's 95. Why should we even take him through this process? And when you have that conversation with yourself as the carer of that 95-year-old, I felt that's where a bit of where we are as Uganda is that we've had a long period of where the models we've been pursuing have not worked. And so now it has just come to bear. Everything is just crashing in on us. So like the 95-year-old cancer patient, we're in that place where we have to ask ourselves the difficult questions. And I don't know whether we are ready for that.
True. Maybe to add on that,
Yes.
2 years back, rightly so, would say there was a crisis, pre-pandemic, and something that we needed to navigate through that time. But the question has always been, what is government doing? And it's a relevant question to ask ourselves, because we went through the pandemic. There was time to prepare and plan for a post-pandemic economic situation. How does then that look for us as Ugandans? And then fast forward to Labor Day, I think at the beginning of the hike of the prices, the finance minister comes and says, you know what, this is your Ukraine-Russia crisis. But we cannot only look at the external factors of where we are without, interrogating the internal contradictions that are happening. The internal factors. Have the prices been going up for a while? Have there been, economic cushions that have been provided as we go along? And so those questions brought us to a reality that we've not been addressing the economic issues that are happening as they are. And we've been just going along with that. Perhaps it will rectify itself as it happens. Maybe supply and demand will come to a place where they're rational. And so when you have a Labor Day weekend happen and the president tells you, eat muogo, leave the bread alone. The wheat is from Russia. And I do not know why we are negating it critically to Russia, because it could be a lot of other things. It could be that perhaps even the remittances that used to come in are not certainly coming in as they are. And maybe also there's a global crisis post-pandemic that we are not even interrogating. And so that is where we went wrong, that as the time went by, we did not create economic cushions that would help us navigate such a time. No wonder we are running wild as a country.
Okay, thank you very much, Tricia. And Eunice talks about systems and the key question around whether the systems are working for us. And then Tricia comes in and you're talking about you're asking the big question of what is government doing, and the president, I think in his speech, kept telling us, basically we were left on our own in that speech. But before we get to what the implications of that speech on the people, the two of you raise contextual and structural questions. And so if we are to locate or center the president's speech within much needed structural conversations, much needed conversations around the contractual obligations of the state to the people. My first question is, the president opened his speech with a lot of Bible verses. And then this speech happened on a Sunday evening. And we also know that from studies, we are a deeply religious country. was that speech escapist? And here is the thing, for anyone who is watching, the three of us love God.
Yes.
But also we need to, I think it's important that we are not taking the name of the Lord in vain. You know, because there was a lot of innuendo, almost 2 to 3 pages of that speech were on Jesus.
I think for a long time, we've seen the president, state officials, handlers, whoever, deflect serious questions that are raised.
Yes.
Each time you raise a serious question, it's deflected. So if you ask yourself, why is the space for civil society being clamped, shut down, etc.? Oh, they're agents of foreign interests. So there's a lot of deflection, and maybe it's a coping strategy, but also it doesn't work. For how long are you going to deflect off the things that need to be addressed? So we have a deep wound, and the only way that we want to address this is to bandage it. So we've not been brave enough and courageous enough to actually remove the bandage and say, it might hurt, and it's going to hurt very deeply, but we actually need to excavate this wound, find the cause of this wound, and deal with it. So as a nation, we've gotten to that space. Even when you think about the fact that we laugh off serious issues, the fact that when we're in pain, we find other ways, drinks or eats or, for a long time for me, my comfort was food.
Yes.
So we find other ways to cope. And so the president really, in a way, he has also gotten us there because he's the head of state. Because that's what he does. That's what his government officials do. That's what everyone, it's really toxic positivity, where you are then being called to look at the positive side, to think about the springs of hope, what is going to happen, challenges happen, and so you need to overcome. So we are overcomers, etc. So it was in that light. And each time you notice that even in your small spaces, when you try to raise serious issues, people will say, no, don't bring that negativity here. But then you're simply saying, can we debate this? Can we have
reality?
This is the reality. Can we have a conversation around this issue? So it's a lot of deflection, and that's how we've survived and we've coped with these serious issues.
And before Tricia comes in, maybe for the viewers, to quote, as usual, those who do not believe in God and in themselves started panicking and predicting doom. However, we, the NRM fraternity, whom God has enabled to handle even bigger problems in the past, such as the wars emanating from the unconstitutionalism between 1966 and 1986, that was part of the speech, you know. And like you have said, it's escapist, you know. But also the fact that this is how we open is mental. It's conditioning of people, because also I know that all of us work within the women's space. It's also to say that when we normalize dealing with problems like this, especially when it's at country level, this is how we are telling women who are battered to pray about it. You know, when anything happens, we're having a situation where people with mental health issues are being told, pray about it. This is a demon, you know, and so the economic problems are real. But yeah, Tricia, please come in.
And that very conversation happened today in one of that group, the ladies' corners group. And then I told them this is how we are normalizing, demonizing mental health. But then rightly so, I want to now look at it in a lens of what do autocracies look like, or what are the characteristics of autocratic leaders? They will normalize 2 things. Buzz and religion. Keep them drunk so they can't think. Keep them busy in church, drunk on Jesus, because he's the solution giver to everything. And so it's a mode of rule. No wonder it is the first thing that shows up when we are having a presidential speech that could have been particularly on economic status and crisis and dealing with it. So this is what is happening. This is how we're going to deal with it. This is how we go forward. And so poverty and religion are 2 things that you cannot take divorced, because I mean, if you look at the number of people in churches today, they will give up their transport and walk home. But you don't have money. They'll give their seed money and still walk. And so the reality is we have a lot of people that believe in God as a population. We are, for God and my country. And so to give you a bit of God and religion and the word is to condition you to imagine that the solutions that we are looking for, all of us are looking at God. But this is the state, the first person in action giving you this remedy for what is happening to you. So everyone for himself and God for us all. That is where we are as a country. Going forward, I think we also need to interrogate how, religion plays a strong emphasis in holding us captive, even in our everyday lives. How are we praying about the things that we should be actively working on? You want a job, but you're praying about it. You're looking, most probably you want to do something, but you're praying about it. It's not that praying is bad, but that follow with action. And that is where we are missing it. Because even when you look at the solutions that he gave, there was no active solution to the prayer, but we prayed it in.
It was actually a solution back to you. It wasn't even.
Then go back to God. Yes. Now that God is for all of us, that is the central point. I think in a nutshell, that is what is. Every man for himself, God for us all. I think that is where we are.
Okay, and you see, now after the God situation, and I hope that we cannot, as the show goes on, we will be able to discuss the detail, if at all there's any detail, on the economic crisis within the president's speech. But I think it's the reason this conversation is important is to contextualize for people who are listening that the things that are said are very deliberate in terms of conditioning, but then also they're very deliberate in censoring, what you say and what you do not say. And again, to extract from the president's speech, he says, there's a struggle between two lines. Yes, and then he quotes Mama Mao Zedong's words and he says, this is a struggle between the correct line of the revolutionaries, who are the change makers, and the reactionaries. And then, there's a word that he uses, a local language, and the struggle between the narrow path that leads to heaven, again heaven, and the broad road that leads to Guyana. Hell. We are back, And so, the president has, yesterday on Sunday in the president's speech, he clustered Ugandans into two categories. And I think on this show, if you were to listen to us, we are not revolutionaries.
We are reactionaries.
Yes. And so he said, you're either a revolutionary or you are a reactionary, a reactionist. Is that a fair categorization when we are discussing pertinent economical issues? Is it a black and white affair for us as a country? Because now what happens is that you need to be very courageous to come and even critique what he said and be happy to be labeled a reactionist. Because silence means that you're trusting God. Silence means that you're a revolutionary who believes that in the long term things will happen. And so again, when we look at yesterday's speech and this categorization, why is it important at this point? Because for me, I believe it is important that we are reacting.
Well, to begin with, we can.
And you can also say that we shouldn't react. We should be revolutionary. But
to begin with, we can flip that back to him and ask who is the reactionary. The reactionary is the person who is coming to tell us and say, okay, Ukraine has happened.
Yes.
COVID happened. We had locusts. We are scientists are in the lab trying to create all these different things. That's the reactionary. The revolutionary should have ensured, one, that we have the right economic model in place. Two, they would have ensured that they have the short term, the medium term, and the long term plan. I personally, in my utopia, what I would have expected to hear from the president, and I have learned to manage my expectations, is to tell us that in the immediate term, this is what we as a government would have done, i.e. cut down on expenditures of certain sectors that are not so important at this moment in time. State House to begin with.
And you've just got a supplementary budget.
Yes, that has just gotten a supplementary budget.
But we're not supposed to react.
So that's the reactionary. Because why are you getting supplementary budgets if you are revolutionary? It's the reactionaries that are acting that way. Revolutionaries would have planned for their state. They would have planned for the economy. They would have known that the economy is going to go through hard spaces. And they would have known that this is what we are going to do when we're in this hard point in time. So for me, actually, I think it was a very good analysis of his government. And we come to the conclusion that actually the reactionaries, it's the government of Uganda, the state, the NRM movement is the reactionary. The revolutionaries are actually the people of Uganda who through all these years have been on their own. We've survived. Before we started the conversation, Tricia was speaking about whether the resilience of Ugandans works for us in the positive or doesn't work for us in the positive. So when you ask Ugandans, what do you celebrate about Ugandans? They'll say our resilience. But then ask the question, why is it that 14 million people are facing mental health challenge? Is it because each time we are being told to be resilient, you will overcome, these challenges happen, take the narrow path, etc. In the process, we are burning out, we are crumbling, etc. We cannot no longer hold it together. We may not be outside throwing stones, but there's a lot of pressure and tension that Ugandans are facing. So the revolutionaries are actually the Ugandans. So the reactionaries, it's the president himself, his family, and all the people around him that are responsible for the state that we are in.
Indeed. And if in fact we are also called reactionaries in the way he explains it, because I think we are stuck at 1986, and I think we need to come and live through these other years that we've lived as a country to be able to realize that 30 years later, we really cannot continue to have a conversation of, oh, we were revolutionaries and this is what we did and blah, blah, blah. But then also to throw back Mao Zedong on him. Mao Zedong says in Contradictions that, you know, subjective conditions, when they meet objective reasons and environments, they ought to be a clash. And I want to believe that we are subjective in the things that we are talking about. We are not just being general. We know this is what is happening. The prices are going up. The economy is going, you know, berserk. So we need to come to a place where we address these issues, lest there will be a clash. Because we cannot, you know, explain away with you're revolutionary, you're reactionary, you're talking against us as a government, but what steps do we have going forward? And like he said, the 86 crisis is going to be something that we need to address and interrogate constantly. Why are we stuck there? Why are we stuck on the man who hunted and got something? Is it your something? We need to be able to, you know, interrogate issues as they happen and not have a history lesson every other time the president comes to talk. Oh, we did this. And as someone. Then they said, so that he is actually misquoting Mao. Because when Mao said that, he was speaking to the fact that if the masses rise up against the proletariat or the person that was in leadership, there will be a clash that will create a downfall, and contradictions are good. That was Mao's conclusion. So he should be okay that we actually question the things that are happening. He should actually be happy that Ugandans still have the voice to say this doesn't make sense. Make it make sense for us.
Thank you very much. And so after the reactionary revolutionary situation, and maybe I should just weigh in on that to say that under normal circumstances, revolutionaries would be providing solutions for the future, you know. And I believe that we who are here on this panel and even people who are listening know that there are certain solutions which may not directly affect, they will not come in our time, but it is to say that what are the provisions you're putting in place so that when our children grow, they are not coming to Civic Space TV in 10 years' time to have this same conversation because we had not handled that some of the structural issues that Eunice talks about. And so for a true revolutionary, it is to say what is the future? You know, and in case locusts came back today, you know, what have we put in place to make sure that we are able to curb locusts beyond prayer? You know,
behind prayer.
in case COVID comes back today, and now that I believe that the cases are beginning
They're coming
to
back.
escalate, which is also a weird situation within the context of the president's speech, because I get alerts from the World Health Organization. And I think around last week, I got an alert for the previous 2 weeks, and Uganda had not registered any COVID case.
And yet there are cases.
I knew people around me who had tested positive, including myself. And I kept saying, okay. And my doctors and the physician said, the cases are coming back, but World Health Organization has 0 cases. So again, who is the reactionary and who is the revolutionary when it comes to all the problems that have been highlighted? But moving on again to the president's speech, the president highlights 3 issues that he said are the factors behind the escalating prices, you know, the high prices. And he says that one is the end of COVID-19, that the end of COVID-19 that suddenly opened up the production and caused pressure on the economy. Okay, that is the first one. Again, he comes and he explains reactionaries in terms of this and revolutionaries. The second one is the issue of palm oil and fuel. And then the third one is the Ukrainian war. But to put context to this, our fuel prices began to dance around August last year. That's when they began to spike. But we did not have any state of the nation address on the spikes. Technocrats tell us that they envisioned an economic crisis, but we did not have
post-COVID
any. We did not have like the government decided not to react. Okay, and yet all indicators pointed to the fact that we're going to have an economic crisis. We had a fuel crisis last year that kept worsening. The first argument was that it was a testing issue. Then we had a breakdown of machines that were scanning. Then we had no fuel in our reserves. But we were in lockdown, so the reserves should have been full capacity. Again, who is fooling who? Yes, the 3 challenges that the president highlights are real. But in regard to how this address is made, is our government being honest about the role that it's playing in aggravating, you know, the impact of these 3 aspects on we the people?
That's such a good question and a good reflection point. COVID happened. No one denies that. The economy went down, etc. So what we needed to hear was what was Uganda's post-COVID economic recovery plan.
Yes.
And yes, indeed, we had a post-COVID recovery plan. But did that plan, was it responsive to the needs of Ugandans? So that's the question. If, for example, we are going to ask the question of why is it that businessmen currently are struggling with loans, and therefore they are being now asked to, you know, their properties are about to be acquired. The thing is that post-COVID, many countries decided they would give bailouts to the big businesses, to the medium enterprises, to the small businesses. But how did that go? And so I had expected in my utopia again that the president would also speak to the post-COVID recovery plan
and how we are performing
and how
against it.
how we are performing against it, and whether it needs to be retweaked, whether it needs to be rethought, etc. But again, it was smart economics to say, oh, COVID happened, but then you don't speak about that. And then what? Because that's what we expected. Yes, COVID happened. We all felt it. We're all shut down, except, of course, the president. He wasn't shut down. The rest of Uganda was shut down except him. So now we're in the post-recovery epoch. What is happening? What is the government doing about it? And that's what Ugandans wanted to hear. So then we would know that we have a president and a state and a government and an executive that really cares. Actually, what Ugandans were expecting from the speech on Sunday was, do you care for us?
Yes.
Are you standing in our corner? Are you fighting? Are we fighting in this corner? But then it became a lot of us and them. So that's separation, etc. And you can have the same argument for Ukraine, because the president said, oh, we need to speak to this Bazungu to stop fighting. Granted, the war is causing ripple effects in our economies. But maybe that's not it. For me, the question...
Also, the Bazungu even listen to us.
Will. And the president can actually take a decolonial approach to these aspects. And if he is standing with Ugandans, Ugandans will also stand with him. Because to take a decolonial approach, you need the state with you. Is the state with you? Or otherwise, the state also looks at you as also a neo-colonialist who has also taken over what the colonialists did, and you've just taken it further. So even when you start pushing back against the colonizers or people from the global south, the citizens will also ask the question, but how have you brought that tide and moved differently? And for many of our economies in Africa, and actually this week, I think on Wednesday, 25th, we're going to be celebrating Africa Liberation Day. That will be another inflection point for us to ask, yes, we wanted unity as Africans. We wanted to bring an freedom from all sorts, economic, political, social, etc. Has it happened since 1963? What has happened? So again, even when he says, oh, these Bazungu are fighting, they should not be fighting, that's why we're not part of that, we are non-aligned. It's still that superficial Pan-Africanism that does not resonate with the citizens, because despite the fact that we now have Black leaders, they've not acted any different from the colonial.
Yes. Okay, and thank you very much, Eunice. Tricia, you're coming in. The president, in his speech, talked about the production of palm oil. And then just after saying that we would be able to buffer our stocks by producing our own palm oil, he threw it back at the people and said that the people were the ones who blocked, the palm oil, the plantations, But then also when he speaks, he speaks about the dollar, about the dollar cost of fuel, and seems to tell us that there is no difference in the prices and what is it called, the relationship to the dollar, the ratio of the dollar to the shilling, and so basically very subtly telling us that nothing has changed. Yes. And so when you have a speech like the one we had on Sunday that has undertones of unseriousness on the side of the people, okay, and maybe Eunice will come in and weigh in on the matter as well. Where does that leave the average Ugandan who is at the periphery of this economy? The average Ugandan who was already struggling to pay for taxi fare from Chireka to Kampala, and now the fares have been increased by 1,000 shillings. The average Ugandan who was staying in Mukono, I don't know, Kayunga, and their fares have been increased by 2,000 shillings. And now we are being asked to walk, okay? And I know that at one point I was on a show with Andrew Mwenda, and he said, but walking is healthy. But again, that is privilege.
Yes.
I should be able to have the choice to walk, and it shouldn't be the only option that I am left with. So where does that leave the average Ugandan? And then after you have responded, I'll come in and have Eunice before we take a break. And Eunice, I'd like you to talk to the study that Akina Mama did on feminist taxation, because in the president's speech, he clearly says he's not doing anything about the taxes. And at the time that Akina Mama did this study, the taxes were already a heavy burden, you know, on women who are facing the impact more, you know. And so in the midst of the study that we did and the advocacy that is doing, what does a speech like the one we had on Tuesday mean for realities of women who are at the periphery already and are under the intense burden of taxation? And the president is saying, figure it out, we are not cutting taxes. Yes.
I love that you say it's very privileged. It's a privileged place to sit because, one, the issues of land, when you talk about palm oil and people refusing, is that we've realized that the land question has been something that is very sticky for us because for a very long time, people have lost their land to the hands of government and not necessarily that they are rightly, you know, compensated. But they lose it and then they become homeless. And as a people, I think land is the one thing you own and know that if every other thing failed, I have an address, I have a place I stay. And so while I understand his concerns of palm oil, I do not negate it to the fact that if we had all the palm oil in this country, we would make the fuel that we need. More or less, if the oil that we have has failed to become oil. It's like it's good, it's there, it's stagnant. So that's a point he should have begun from. I mean, from the time we discovered oil, what have we used it for? People are pulling out in the deal of the oil because they don't want to invest in start going green. And the other reality is you cannot tell people that nothing has changed when State House has an approved supplementary budget, when legislators are saying they want to increase their salaries.
Because of
the crisis. Yes. When there is no cut down in public servants and so we're just going on as we go, but people are not being paid as well. And there is all this expenditure happening. You're giving investors money for things that they don't have investment that they are bringing, but you're even giving them tax holidays. You're giving them money to invest.
You're thinking of giving more money.
Yes. So when you look at such an environment and someone comes and tells you, I don't have money, it's akin to seeing your father have money being given to them and then you tell them, give me some money. It's like, I don't have money. Because I see you giving everyone else other than the taxpayer that is giving you this very money. And today I was reading, and then because the next budget reading is coming up and the public debt is going to rise to a tune of 19 trillion, because that's how much we are imagining to borrow. And the taxpayer is still going to be able to foot these things. So with such realities of, you've talked about the dollar, but we even have people that are living on less than $1, graduates and even people on the last mile. So we need to check ourselves in privilege, but then also I think we also need to come to the reality that this government doesn't care for us. I think that is where we also fail because we are imagining that they care. I think that is the imagination of every citizen. You're custodians of our money. The taxpayer has paid the taxes. There was a tax hike post-COVID. Everything went to the roof. And, you know, URA says now we're even going to tax online businesses because in the pandemic, businesses went online and we didn't know how to do that. So we need that money as well. So you've created areas where you're getting this pool. The market economy has widened both online and offline, and yet the regular citizen is not even feeling the need he's not feeling their money. Like, where is my money going? So it's privilege, but then it's also adamance to care. It's like there is that feel of to each their own. Yes. But the money is being spent. So Ugandans are going to have a very hard time, you know, creating a correlation with all this money that we've budgeted. How is it? I mean, doctors were on strike recently. Science teachers were on strike. Everything just can't be going wrong and government just can't be seated saying, we have no solution to what is going on. At some point, they're going to either one, create people to uprise. I don't know if we've reached that place with the level of apathy that we are living in, but you just can't keep, I think the Uganda say, I don't know how it says, but you just can't keep pressing the nose. Eventually it's going to bleed. And that is where we are going. At some point, there's going to be, you know, after bottling up all this stress, there's going to be an outburst. Most probably not for the better.
Yes, thank you very much. Eunice.
Wow. Well, to answer your question on taxation, really what feminists are calling for is progressive taxation.
Yeah.
And for a long time, we've said to ourselves, our tax system is not progressive.
Yes.
Why? Because the tax base remains narrow.
Yes.
If you look at tax to GDP levels, Uganda in that region, in East Africa, ours has remained at 14% on average, while for other countries, they've moved quite a bit along. Why? Because they are broadening their tax base. And to broaden the tax base means that you bring many other people into the fold. But what we've seen for Uganda is that we are taxing the same people, and the burden then falls heavy on certain categories. So a progressive tax. The other part of the tax which the president touched on is the issue of, he said, oh, I can't even give you tax incentives. You as citizens, I can't give you those because I'll lose all these billions of money. But then I'm going to give tax incentives to other categories of people. So there are people who get tax incentives and there are those who don't.
Yes.
And I know I don't like binaries too much, but in this case, it really felt a lot like those who get incentives and those who don't. And who don't, the majority. Who are the taxpayers. And the non-taxpayers are the ones who are getting all these incentives. There's something fundamentally wrong with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies. We're going to take a break and we'll be back in a little bit.
Violence, anger and hatred, misery, loss and pain. No, this shouldn't be the situation after elections. Fellow youth and Ugandans, now that elections are over, it is time to embrace our differences in opinion, political affiliations, and other issues that tend to divide us. We need to refocus on all the things that are beneficial to us, our families and friends. It's our duty to restore peace in our communities, and even as we participate in democratic processes, it's important that we do it with dignity. Say no to post-election violence. This message is brought to you by Center for Constitutional Governance in partnership with Action Aid Uganda.
Welcome back from the break. And given that we are in the last segment of the show, we will move on to discuss the president's proposals and solutions to the economic crisis that we are facing. So after listening to the president, could you share with the audience some of the solutions that he had, especially for those who have not been able to watch his speech or to read it? So Tricia, would you like to go first?
Okay.
On the many solutions that were offered.
On the many solutions that were offered, we had 3 solutions provided by the president. I think the last one was in conclusion, but one was be frugal in how you spend, how you eat, what you buy, what you use. Just, use a little, don't use too much. And the second one was buy local. As much as it concerns you, buy from, local investors or local companies. These are things here. And I think also there was produce more. Yeah, there was one for more production. We need to produce more things within Uganda. Perhaps it will be able to solve our economic crisis. And finally, he just resolved that the resolution, therefore, was that there will be no tax holidays, no tax cuts, and business will go on as usual. Because if we do cut the tax, then we may injure ourselves. It may be problematic, and we may end up in a deeper crisis than we stand as of now. So those were the recommendations that he provided for us.
Wow.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. Thank you, Eunice. Yes.
So I actually think that there was the official speech and the unofficial speech. So there's part 2 that we didn't receive.
He said he's coming back on the 6th of June.
So I'm hoping that there's part 2 where the president is going to come and give us proposals. So maybe Sunday's speech was part 1 because actually his conclusion, there was no proposal. Because the proposals are supposed to come from what the government is going to do about this situation. And what we had was what we as citizens need to do.
Yes.
So I am suspecting and I'm hopeful that the president is now going to come back and give us proposals of what actually the government is going to do. And part of that is going to be within the budget. The budget is going to be read, and maybe we'll be able to assess and ask ourselves the question whether the budget responds to the current situation or it doesn't. Of course, we've looked at the draft framework papers and we've seen already where the bulk of the money is being allocated to. It's being allocated to the military, defense, to State House, to all those sectors that are consumptive. We're not seeing how much is going into the production, how much is going into the care sectors, education, health, etc. So hopeful, not that hopeful in terms of the budget. I don't think a lot is going to change there. We know that Uganda has been exploring post-COVID recovery processes. And again, a lot of conversations have been had about whether those are responsive or not responsive. So I believe that we're going to continue in that same conversation of, is this responsive or it's not responsive? What we needed to have heard from the president were the fiscal policies that the government is proposing in terms of jump-starting the economy. And that we didn't hear. Now that we didn't hear, I don't know whether we'll get to hear it or we keep waiting. We keep in waiting mode. So essentially, I think what the president, and I believe maybe it was in response to the fact that Dr. Kizza Besigye has decided to protest against this. He always responds to him quicker.
He's a reactionary.
Yeah, he's a reactionary. It was a reactionary speech to Dr. Kizza Besigye saying, what is the government doing about this? And so he came to explain to us and then also to point us to the Bible and ask us to know that challenges happen and we can move forward. So in terms of the government proposing, there were no proposals. So maybe now what we need to focus on going forward is to think about what are the proposals that can actually work. He spoke about 2026 when we are going to begin producing oil. Now, for everyone here, we know that we have been waiting for this oil since some time. 2020, at some point it was 2019, 2021. Now we have a new date of 2026, 2025, 2026. So that was his solution. So his solution is in the medium term. It's not in the immediate. So in the immediate, I guess we're going to walk.
He told you to eat, to make bread from millet.
But we still need fuel. So in terms of fuel, where he said, oh, let's wait and see. We're going to have conversations with the Bazungu. But then also we are going to think about our oil when it's going to begin production. Of course, there's a school of thought that oil has already been mortgaged to get loans. So it's actually not even going to benefit.
We can't rely on it.
We can't rely on that. So in essence, we are on our own.
Maybe to pick up on what Eunice is saying, in his speech, he puts the fuel, a liter of fuel is at $1.48. We know we are going into $2 by the end of this week, most probably. But the reality is, his argument is if we cut on fuel, is that we will have a dead reserve at the end of the crisis. But unfortunately, if the prices continue to shift every week, the economy and Ugandans will eventually cave in.
Yes, this is not a sustainable solution. It's not a solution at all.
So like we were earlier speaking on Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka reached that point. I mean, we do not have money. We don't have any dollar exchange in our reserves. Sit and wait. That is where we are coming if we do not have actual solutions to this crisis. And it's unfortunate. We are choosing to wait. It's very unfortunate.
Yes. But also, just to say, and maybe it would be a good idea, I know the two of you have already been throwing out possible solutions that the government would take on in regard to addressing this crisis. But it's also to say that when we talk about the green economy, how much investment are we putting into the green economy? We have continuously talked about the standard gauge railway. Maybe the transport crisis wouldn't have been as bad. We have talked about the investment in science education and the construction of Kira the Kira what? The
Kira EVs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which are supposed to run on electricity. And so one of the bigger questions to have right now in the midst of this crisis is, where are the dividends for all the investment we have had in science and technology, but then also where are the commitments around clean transport, so that at least you're buffering your citizens when it comes to the much needed sectors where they are overspending. Yes. So I don't know whether you have any further reflections, long-term, medium-term, on what we should be thinking about, so that we are not having the same conversation at the next economic crisis.
Indeed. I think, first of all, we need to stop gagging dissent. It's very critical that civic space should always be available for people to be able to talk and address these issues. In the long term, a lot of the solutions that we're looking for are with us. And it is just a matter of time. If government actually chose to listen, they would actually find that there are solutions within that society, within the citizens, because we live this life. We are here, we are evident to it. And then the second thing is political will. I'm telling you, whether we had the best economic relief, whether we thought about it, if there is no political will to address these issues, it's going to be a constant cycle of to each their own, to each their own. And so we need to not only call out government to be able, to plan for the people as a custodian of the taxpayers' money, but then we also need to check and interrogate our leaders, whether they are for the people and by the people, and whether the state is actually, existing in a realm where they really do care. Then thirdly, and maybe also last, is that we need to sit with ourselves. In our utopias, different governments and different democracies would have handled this differently.
Yes.
But our reality is we are a quasi-autocracy, a pseudo-democracy. So we need to, look at it from that lens of how do we survive in such an environment? How do we make sense of our storm in our teacup? It looks good outside, but it's brewing on the inside. So those are things that we need to have. I do not have any other solution outside us and the government having, a beckoning. Earlier in one of the spaces we share, they put a post that an article that said, it's really not an article, it was just like an info sheet. It says, if you wait for government, you might wait forever.
Yes.
If you wait for a few people, but if we do it as a community, and I really, really push for Ubuntu. Please let's hold each other's hands as community while we wait for our government to show cause. But in the now, if you have a bunch of matoke, please share with your neighbors. Don't be greedy about it. And yes, we might be, really being frugal, but we live within community. Perhaps we need to think of how Ubuntu can make sense for us.
Yes, that's true. Thank you. Eunice, your parting shots.
My parting shots. I think the solutions within our communities are known, and that's where we've been for the longest time. So we have to go back to the government. I know we are living in a quasi-autocracy, a pseudo-democracy, but we still need to ask the government who take our taxes on a daily to do something about it. And so I hope that our voices will not be muted, that we'll continue to speak when it matters. We'll continue to call out our legislators. We'll continue to ask the executive to do better by Ugandans. And so if we are called upon, even us as citizens, to amplify our voices, to speak out on issues, on this specific issue, let's not let the leaders that always stand for us stand alone. When Dr. Kizza Besigye speaks, let's support him because he's speaking and carrying the burden for many of us. When other actors speak, let's support them so that we are able to push back on the excesses of government. I know the budget is already passed. Maybe that's a foregone conclusion. But then maybe there are other processes that we can continue to engage in to ensure that actually we have a government that is responsive to its citizens.
Thank you very much, Eunice, and thank you very much, Tricia, for joining us. And to the audience, thank you very much for being part of this conversation. And just to reiterate what we keep saying on this show, I understand, as a host, I understand that a number of us might be fatigued with the president's speeches. you know. But you know that the devil is always in the detail.
Yeah.
And so even in that fatigue, mobilize all your energy reserves and get to know what exactly it is that our leaders are saying about what concerns us, because we have a citizen's contract with the government, you know, by virtue of the fact that we hold elections in this country, and there are obligations on both our sides, and we are attempting to meet our part of the obligations as citizens. And so if you're listening in, pay attention. The state of the economy can be depressing, but it's one of those conversations that we need to listen to. If you can't listen to it, read it, you know, so that you're not shocked that there's no white savior coming. You need to figure out how to make bread using millet, you know, because that is a solution from what we had on Sunday. But also the budget reading is coming up. Take interest in it. Like Eunice has said, it has been passed. There's probably not much you can do, but it's important that you at least know where the money is going. So that, again, you're not shocked that it's not going where it's much needed. But also after understanding that the budget cycle is a cycle. As it starts, a new process begins. And maybe with the next budget, if we were more engaged as citizens, we would have one that would be pro-people, pro-poor, and you know, and probably more reflective of our needs as citizens. So be interested in the discourse of this country. Otherwise, that is it from us, and have yourselves a lovely afternoon. Thank you.